Hello, I'm Jerry Crow of the Pacifica Historical Society and host of the show Footprints of Pacifica, the show where we each week get together to discover and explore the lure and lore of lovely Pacifica, its character and its characters. The focus of today's show is a wonderful piece of local history, the designation of the Portola Discovery Site as an official National Historic Landmark, and of the man that made it possible, Carl McCarthy. Our guest today is Pat Kramer, who is Carl McCarthy's daughter. And welcome, Pat, to the show. Why don't you tell us how this all came to be?
Okay. I brought along some pictures that will help us to recount this story. After my father retired in 1964, he became actively interested in local history and specifically in promoting Portola's European discovery of San Francisco Bay, which happened from Sweeney Ridge, right within the boundaries of the city of Pacifica. Next picture. This is a photograph of an artist's rendition of the actual sighting and the expedition itself. Next one. Now, in the 1960s, when my dad got interested in this, it was still possible to drive from the end of Fassler Avenue on the west side of Sweeney Ridge in Pacifica all the way up to the top of Sweeney Ridge and the discovery site. Now, this road was very steep and very rutted, but that didn't deter my father. Let's have the next picture, and I think you can see some of the wonderful view, but also the ruts in the road. Most of the time, however, he didn't drive up from the Pacifica side, but drove from the San Bruno side of the ridge through the San Francisco watershed property. Next. He bought what he called his mud tires, so he could still go up there and not get stuck during inclement weather on the dirt roads of the watershed property. Next one. It doesn't snow very often in Pacifica, but when it did in 1977, the first thing my father thought to do was to go up to Sweeney Ridge to the discovery site. This is the landmark up there, and the next picture shows the view back to Point San Pedro in the snow. Next one. And here's a picture with my father and my mother, Grace McCarthy, and me, and my dad's intrepid Chevy with his mud tires. Carl believed that it was very important for people to see the discovery site in person so that they really understood it. And over a period of 16 years before his death in 1981, he made over 800 trips up to Sweeney Ridge and guided more than 11,000 people to the site. No, not next one, actually. Both Carl and Grace worked tirelessly for federal recognition of Sweeney Ridge, and in 1968, it was designated as a registered National Historic Landmark. This is a photo of my mother, Grace McCarthy, who was mayor of Pacifica at the time, receiving the plaque from the National Park Service representative. Okay, Carl was responsible for taking pictures of the campsites where the Portola expedition stopped on their way north from Monterey Bay, including several aerial shots of the coastline. And as part of his efforts to promote the discovery site, he created a slideshow, which he showed to numerous organizations and civic groups around the Bay Area. In addition, in total, he made about 450 of these presentations and showed the slideshow to about 8,000 people. The slideshow eventually was modified to be a film strip with both English and Spanish narration and was used in schools. We're going to see a version of this show tonight, and we'll be showing it now as part of our episode of Footprints of Pacifica.
Excellent.
I am Carl McCarthy, a longtime member of the San Mateo County Historical Association, also the California Historical Society, and the Portola Expedition Foundation. What we are about to review is a pictorial story showing how San Francisco Bay was discovered. The program is so fast-moving and so full of historical facts that most viewers want to see it more than one time. As a part of the program, you will get a vivid description of Captain Portola's march up the coast. We hope you will then know how the bay was discovered, the location of the discovery site, and the importance of the discovery to California and American history. In our search for additional historical facts, we ran across a very interesting photo. This picture was taken at the discovery site on September 29, 1947. That's a long time ago. It shows civic leaders of San Francisco and San Mateo counties, including members of the Board of Supervisors of each county. There were also a number of well-known historians. There was excellent representation from several very important historical groups. The man with the paper in his hand is Professor Herbert E. Bolton of the University of California, who was the guest of honor. All of these VIPs were there to dedicate Sweeney Ridge as the official San Francisco Bay discovery site. 28 years later, a massive 4-ton marker was finally placed at this historic spot. This impressive serpentine boulder now marks the bay discovery site. This is looking east across the bay to Mount Diablo. Here we are looking south from the discovery site. In the background is some of the 23,000-acre watershed property which is owned by San Francisco. The foreground shows part of the activity the day the National Landmark plaque was accepted. More of the activity that day. In the upper right-hand corner, standing on a flatbed truck which served as a platform, are the dignitaries who took part in the National Landmark ceremonies. The salute to the flag. The lady at the microphone was chairman of the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors at that time. At the left is the mayor of Pacifica, who is waiting to accept a bronze historical marker. The man at the mic is a representative of the National Park Service. He is about to present the bronze marker to the city of Pacifica. And here's a picture of that plaque. In 1968, the San Francisco Bay Discovery Site was finally recognized as a National Historic Landmark. Many of us hope the Discovery Site will become a widely known national monument. In this review, you will see some remarkable pictures, many of them air photos, showing the path of Portola from Monterey to San Francisco Bay. And we are here to bring you a fascinating story about the discovery of the bay. This scene took place when Captain Gaspar de Portola and his land expedition seeking Monterey Bay, happened instead upon an immense arm of the sea, which later would be named San Francisco Bay. Without this accidental discovery, California history might have been entirely different. Two almost unbelievable facts about world-famous San Francisco Bay have always intrigued historians. First, that an enormous harbor could remain hidden and undiscovered for so many years. And second, that it was discovered not from the sea, but from a mountain ridge in San Mateo County. That important moment in history occurred on November the 4th, 1769, when Don Gaspar and members of the expedition stood on this ridge in today's scenic Pacifica and gazed out on one of the world's greatest harbors. And now, to explain further how the bay discovery came about, is the Pacifica mayor who accepted the bronze marker some years ago. Here is Grace McCarthy.
Let's backtrack a few years. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Just 50 years later, in 1542, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, whose ship was the first to explore our California coast, sailed right on past the Golden Gate. In 1579, Francis Drake sailed past in the Golden Hind. Counting the annual voyages of the Spanish galleons, some 200 ships had sailed past the Golden Gate without discovering the bay. In contrast, Captain Portola, the first governor of Alta and Baja California, pioneered a trail over land. This pictorial story covers the last 100 miles of the expedition's long northward trek. During the first week of October 1769, Captain Portola's group of 63 men with 200 horses and mules camped near the mouth of the Salinas River. They were weary and worn out. Their camp location is shown at the bottom of the broken line, which represents today's Coast Highway number 1. The undaunted party had traveled overland 1,000 miles from their starting point at Loreto on the Baja Peninsula and the Gulf of California. Their objective was to establish a presidio and a mission at the port of Monterey to prove Spain's control of Alta California. But they hadn't recognized wide open Monterey Bay, as they had expected to find a landlocked harbor. And now you will hear the voice of an eminent jurist, a man whose Spanish ancestors were among the first pioneers in California. I am proud to present, on tape, the Honorable Judge Francisco Jose de Larios.
Here is the Pajaro River near Watsonville. The soldiers named it Rio del Pájaro, Bird River, because native Indians had killed a large eagle and displayed it for the Spaniards to see. Portola and his officers had decided to push on up the coast to search for the Monterey harbor and to keep a lookout for the packet ship which was to meet them with supplies. Pinto Lake was their next campsite. Here they stayed for 5 days to rest the sick, some of whom were now desperately ill, while Sergeant Jose Ortega and his scouts explored the coast ahead. A plaque at the Pinto Lake Park gives the expedition the credit for first discovering the California redwoods. The ponderous, slow-moving caravan continued within sight of the sea and camped on Soquel Creek near today's town of Capitola. They traveled very slowly to cause the sick as little distress as possible. The next day, they forded this river, which they named the San Lorenzo. Their campsite is now the civic center of the city of Santa Cruz. Laguna Creek was their next stop. Beyond this camp, they encountered many steep ravines. One deep arroyo was named Barranco de la Olla, because the mule carrying the big soup kettle, or olla, fell into this ravine. The campsite that night was at Scott Creek, near the ocean. During the third week of October, they camped on Waddell Creek and were drenched by rain. Here, Captain Portola feared that a number of his men would die. This historical marker tells of the amazingly rapid recovery of the sick. Below the steep cliffs north of Waddell Creek, the expedition had to travel along the beach at low tide to reach present San Mateo County. This is a map of part of the San Francisco Peninsula. It shows the path of Portola going up the coast to the discovery site and then down and over to El Palo Alto, the tall tree. The red dots indicate the camps on the trip north, and the blue dots the campsites on the return trip. Sebastián Vizcaíno, who was the first to describe Monterey Bay, cited this point back in 1603. Having just celebrated New Year's Day, he named the point Año Nuevo. This is just one of the many ocean wonderland scenes along the San Mateo County coast. Here, White House Creek trickles into the Pacific Ocean. The old barn and the dirt road show us the way to Casa Grande, Portola's campsite on the night of October 23rd. It was named Casa Grande because a large building, which Father Crespi said could hold 200 people, was located in the center of the Indian village. This is White House Creek, where it emerges from the mountains. Here is Pescadero Creek, famous for steelhead fishing. The Indian chieftain at Casa Grande had furnished the expedition with 2 guides. The diaries noted that the natives were the friendliest so far observed. They were near San Gregorio Beach, where a state historical marker tells about this part of the journey. The expedition camped for 3 days on San Gregorio Creek, about a mile up this valley. This is the beautiful Tunitas Creek area. The next campsite was near the Purísima Creek Falls. The camp was a few hundred yards upstream. Nearby were some abandoned Indian huts. The curious who entered the huts became infested with fleas, so they named the camp Rancheria de las Pulgas, Flea Village. Pilarcitos Creek, near the ocean, was probably the location of the next campsite. The diary of engineer Miguel de Costanzo tells of another heavy rain which delayed their march. With provisions running short, the officers first decided to butcher mules for food, but then put off this drastic step until a time of greater need. The next campsite was on Martinez Creek, which is 9 miles north of Half Moon Bay. The camp was at the end of the valley, close to the mountains, and was named El Rincón de las Almejas because of the plentiful supply of mussels found on the rocks near this beach. Now we are looking back south toward the town of Montara. The road in the foreground is the old coast highway, which followed the general route of the Portola expedition over the ridge. This shows the Devil's Slide area. The sheer cliffs and the rocky ground explain why Scout Ortega followed a trail further inland. Portola's party did not see this majestic air view of the Montara Ridge, with Pacifica and San Francisco in the background. The expedition crossed at a much lower saddle of the ridge at the 900-foot level. The weather had cleared, and the Farallon Islands were plainly visible, and some of the group suspected that they had already passed Monterey Bay. Here is a spectacular view of Point San Pedro and the Montero Mountains from 9,000 feet in the air. It shows the rough and rugged area over which the expedition had to travel. Their campsite for 4 days was on San Pedro Creek. It was from this camp that Ortega was sent to scout the surrounding area. Now we are part way up the ridge to the discovery site. Perhaps you recognize Point San Pedro. And here is the place where the great discovery was made. This painting shows how this artist thought the bay looked 200 years ago. Some of today's landmarks are shown in this night photo and the next few pictures. On the left is San Bruno Mountain, identified in the daytime by the huge sign nearby, South San Francisco, the industrial city. On the horizon to the right, beyond the lights of the East Bay, is Mount Diablo, and below on the right is the busy San Francisco airport. When you visit the discovery site, there is much to see. Here we are looking southeast from the discovery site to the bay. This air photo was taken above Skyline Boulevard and San Andreas Lake, looking west to the discovery site ridge with Point San Pedro in the background. To the north, you can usually see Mount Tamalpais in Marin County. This shot was taken almost directly above the discovery site. Further to the northwest is Point Reyes, the well-known landmark, which guards the north entrance to the Golden Gate. And here is Point San Pedro, the other ancient sentinel, which is a south anchor of the outer bay. The discovery site and the airport are in the background. The next Portola campsite is now covered by San Andreas Lake. Crystal Springs Lake is in the background. This area was formerly a long valley, which the expedition followed south. Their next campsite was by a natural lagoon, now covered by Crystal Springs Lake. The camp was near the present concrete dam and the beautiful bridge now across San Mateo Creek. To the right of this photo is Route 280, the Junipero Serra Freeway. This is looking north above Crystal Springs Lake, with San Andreas Lake further up the valley. Ortega had picked the best route to the next campsite. Here we are looking north toward the railroad bridge alongside the big redwood tree which gave the city of Palo Alto its name. At the left is wide El Camino Real, then the railroad tracks, and in the lower right-hand corner, San Francisquito Creek, winding its way toward the bay. This is the view from the north, or San Mateo County side of the creek, where the main group waited while the scouts, still hoping to find their supply ship, attempted to circle the bay. 4 days later, after Ortega reported that it was impossible to get around the bay, the expedition in great despair began retracing its steps to San Diego. Little did Portola at that time realize the expedition's remarkable achievement, one of the great events in American and world history, the discovery of San Francisco Bay.
Well, welcome back here in the studio, Pat. Now, I understand there are several ways to get to the discovery site these days.
Well, yes, you can hike from the top of Fassler Avenue, and that's a beautiful way to go. with views of the ocean all the way up. It's also possible to drive from the San Bruno side, go up near the county jail. And
The very end of Sneath Lane, yeah.
Yes, and you need to get permission from the Park Service, and they send a ranger to unlock the gate so that you're allowed to drive up with an escort.
Or you can park there at the gate and walk up.
Oh, yes,
also.
certainly.
And then here in town, there's the Shell Dance Nursery parking lot as another approach.
That's right.
And finally, going south from the campus of Skyline College, one gets there. That's a little more strenuous because you have to go across what they call the notch. It's a steep downslope and the upslope on the other side, but pretty scenic. And then there's the annual Discovery Day that we honor the first Saturday of every November.
That's right.
And
And we meet at the community center, and we show this historic presentation that my father made, and then people either hike or drive up to the Discovery site to see the view, which is usually quite good.
we assemble at the top of Fassler, in fact, and follow the route he made famous.
Yes.
So it's always a wonderful event. The area is administered by the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, part of the National Park Service, and they provide a ranger for those events, George Jagarian, wonderful guy, and he's very knowledgeable about all the aspects of history that are discussed on the way up with him. And I think they have done a fine job of maintaining accessibility, keeping the trails in good shape. Formerly there were considerable erosion problems, but they have been resolved now, much to our benefit. Well, we're getting close to the end of the show, Pat. I want to thank you for joining us here today, and tell our viewers that if they want to get involved with the Pacifica Historical Society and our many projects, our address is Post Office Box 752, Pacifica 94044. Our website is pacificahistory.org, and it's a website from which you can see all sorts of historical aspects of Pacifica through our wiki page. And our phone number is 650-359-5462. Thanks for watching our show, and we'll finish with our favorite line from Longfellow. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints in the sands of time.
So this is when we talk to each other.